Hello and welcome to Coven, the podcast where two witchy sisters sit around the metaphorical fire to talk about books for several hours. I'm your host and resident literature nerd, Charlie.
And I'm your co-host and fellow literary lover, Arwen, also known as Spider.
In today's episode, we'll be looking at the dead famous bestseller, Skullduggery Pleasant, and why you need to go get this book right now.
Like, right now.
This is Episode 1, Skullduggery Pleasant by Derek Landy. So, as I've mentioned, we are going to be talking about Skullduggery Pleasant, which is by Derek Landy. I am pronouncing that correctly, am I? Is that correct?
As far as I'm aware, you're pronouncing that correctly.
I know he's Irish, to my knowledge, so I'm worried that there's going to be some bizarre pronunciation that I'm just completely messing up.
You can put on a stupid Irish accent if you want.
I'm not going to do that one today. I fear I will offend an entire nation of people. It's actually quite an old book. It's not old, but it's old for what we're looking at. It's actually the first book was published back in 2007. So for it to still stand up and still to have consistently good reviews to this day is quite impressive. It even says on the book that it is the dead famous bestseller, which, all puns intended, I absolutely love it. And it is true. It is very, very popular. It is very, very highly adored by both young and old audiences alike. Doesn't matter your age group, because this book is obviously aimed at a younger audience. It's written from the perspective of a 12-year-old girl. And her adventures, and we'll get into the plot in a moment, and Arwen will be giving us a full rundown because she is much more knowledgeable on this book than I am, even though I have basically read it.
You're technically, when it comes to this particular book, you're just as knowledgeable as I am.
I mean, yeah, but why would I take the honour of you giving this wonderful, rundown of your favourite book series away from you? I'd hate to do that.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'll let you do the hard work for that bit. But yeah, it's a fantastically... It's a whole series of books. How many books are there total? I think there are...
Ooh.
Oh, goodness.
At least 12.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13! Ooh, spooky number. We love that. And there are 13 books in the series. We're only looking at the first book today because A, that's all I can really manage to read in a week. Actually, I read it in 3 days, but that's besides the point. And B, it just doesn't make sense to try and look at a whole book series if you guys want to, actually get into a book and read this. I'm now going to hand over to Arwen so she can give us a rundown of the plot again. If you don't want to hear the plot, please leave. I promise. Just if you don't want to hear it, please leave. Don't put yourself through it. But if you either read the book already or don't care about the spoilers, feel free to continue listening on while Arwen gives you the rundown of the plot.
Okay. Basically, the plot summary of this book is we are following our main character, Stephanie Edgley, who has just recently lost her uncle under, it seems normal circumstances at first, but is later revealed to be actually quite mysterious circumstances. And through her uncle's death, she meets a very strange and peculiar-looking man who wraps himself up consistently called Skullduggery Pleasant. Mm-hmm. And it's basically following her as, via him, she gets introduced to this world of sorcerers and magic and all these things that exist just behind a curtain of her everyday life that she'd never even realized was there. And like I said, it is revealed later that her uncle was actually murdered, and it's a murder mystery, basically. It's figuring out who did it.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be much of a book without that, would it? Her uncle died of completely natural causes, and that was the end of it. Have a good time. That's the end of the story.
I mean, maybe the bad guy got lucky. He had a heart attack. It's like,
oh, I didn't even have to do anything here. I just let him go.
Just let him go.
Oh dear, but do go on. So the uncle dies from murder. He got murdered to death.
The uncle dies of murder. It's just her meeting a cast of colourful and peculiar characters. Mm-hmm. Both good, bad, and not so sure.
Unsure, undecided.
Well, let's be honest, there's at least a few characters who sit in the unsure category.
Oh yeah, definitely. But do go on. So you've got the mysterious causes. You meet a whole band of characters along her journey of figuring out what's real, what's not real, what's good, what's bad.
What's real, what's not real. Figuring out if she herself can do magic, and ultimately finding out that her uncle was the key in a plot to something that could end up destroying the world. So her and Skullduggery and the group of fun characters that they interact with end up having to try and stop a guy from basically ending everything and reshaping it in his own image. Well, in an old god's old image, but
yeah, essentially.
And it's that race to it, and oh, it's so good.
I think it is really, really fun. I think it's an interesting take because it's obviously you've got the stereotypical idea of like the fight between good and evil, but the book is very clever, and the series as a whole is very clever at blurring the lines between good and evil. So we were talking briefly earlier about how a lot of the kind of good guys as such are not depicted in like bright white clothing and being all good and pure. I mean, one of the like biggest good guys on the entire team is a skeleton dressed purely in black. Go figure. And it's really interesting to see this idea of like, well, you've got, I think you mentioned earlier, what was it you said that was really, really good? The light in the darkness and darkness in the light.
A heavy key element that this book has and every book in this series has is like this underlying tone of in darkness there's light and in light there is darkness. Like every character you meet, no matter how good they seem, there'll be something not good about them, and every bad character you meet, there's usually something good in them. And like the books do such a good job of having this. And like constantly having characters who in most other media would be very strongly either a bad person or a good person. Like they constantly have them so close to the line, and it's like the books do a really good job.
And if we now, I'm going to have a quick look at the target audience of this book. So for those of you who aren't aware, this book is actually classed as a quote unquote children's book. Not children's as in like kind of baby picture books, but it is a novel and a series aimed more at a younger age group, sort of between the 12 and 14 age group. Anywhere around there, anyone can read it. Obviously, that's not to say if you are older, you're not allowed to read it, and if you're younger, and you know you're also not allowed to read it. Obviously, if you're younger, be aware that there are some dark themes in it. But it is aimed for a younger audience, and I think considering it is a book aimed at a younger audience, there's a lot of not only vocabulary and words in there. There's a lot of themes and images that a kid wouldn't pick up on. Like a kid won't see some of the subtleties in what Skullduggery does or in what other people do, and certain kind of themes that are kind of almost more catered towards adults. Now, that's not to say it's not good for its target audience. It is absolutely fantastic and fun and inventive and just really, really interesting to read as a kid, and also then to look back on as an adult and go, oh, I see. It's very, very well written for its target audience. You'll notice as an adult, the only thing I will say if you're reading it is you'll notice that the writing style might seem a bit clunky. It's because it's made for a kid. It's made for an easier read. It's made to be a bit simpler. The plot line is going to be quite generic. And it's also not very generic at all, but the overarching theme is very generic because it's more accessible to a younger audience. So it not only is very good for its target audience, it works for older audiences as well. And even as an adult reading it, even looking at it from an adult perspective, not looking at it from the target audience perspective, it's a really, really good book. It's well written. It's very fun. The themes are cleverly intertwined. There are so many twists and turns. Like, you're like, oh, there's one big twist. Oh, cool. Okay, well, I know what's going with that one. Oh, no, wait, he's twisted again. Oh, wait, okay, well, I don't know what's going... Oh, wait, and again! There's a lot that, like, you think, oh, this is like this thing. Oh, no, actually, wait. No, it's that thing. Okay, well, we've established... Oh, no, wait, no, it's not that. It's actually the original thing. There's a lot that's actually quite complicated with it. And I think that's why it keeps both younger and older audiences engaged. There's a lot...
on that topic... The book also does a great job of, if you are willing to, like, really, and I mean really, really, really pay attention, to a certain degree, you can figure out some of these things coming. Like, it's not like they blindside you. The hints are there. They're just, sometimes they're so subtle, you don't even think about them, and then suddenly it's like, wait, that thing that I thought was just like a side gag or whatever.
Yeah, like someone I mean, this doesn't actually happen, but it's essentially along the lines of like someone parks their bike and you're like, okay, cool, someone's parked their bike, and it turns out that parking of the bike is like this massive clue to something major that happens later on down the line. It's very nuanced and it's very cleverly done as a result of it being quite subtle. Which, so to a kid, it's like, oh, wow, this big thing has happened, which keeps them engaged because it's something crazy and exotic and exciting. But for an adult, if you look at the signs, you're like, ah, I see what you've done there, Mr. Landy. That's very clever. And I think that's why it's really, really engaging. And I have to admit, I've thoroughly enjoyed reading it over the few days that I've read it. And I'm going to read the rest of the series. I'm not going to lie, but we'll talk about that in a moment. I've really, really enjoyed it, and I know Arwen is the essentially #1 fan of the series. So
yeah, actually, fun fact about that: I didn't start with the first book.
Oh yeah.
I tried to read the first book. I tried my best, but it took me ages to get into reading, and I just couldn't do it for the first book.
Mm-hmm.
But I forget which book it was. It was like book number 5 or 6 or something. My nana bought me it just on the offhand because I had like a weird like monsters phase that I never grew out of. So she was like, "Oh, my granddaughter would love that," and I read that, and I was hooked.
It definitely seems like your sort of book, to be fair. There's skeletons, and let's talk about the genres actually, and why this is probably one of our one's favourites, and also probably one of my favourites at the moment. So when you think about a genre of a book, it's generally like 1 or 2 genres. You might have like a fantasy romance, you might have like a sci-fi romance, you might have a sci-fi fantasy. So yeah, there's normally only 1 or 2 main genres of a book. Normally only one, but you'll occasionally see like a little bit of romance intertwined into it, or a little bit of like fantastical fantasy intertwined, or whatever, or maybe a little bit of like thriller or something put in there. This book has 4 main genres. Well, technically 5 if you count both thriller and crime, but it's a crime book, obviously. Mr. Skullduggery himself is a detective. It's fantasy because guess what? Mr. Skullduggery is a talking skeleton. It is a horror because guess what? We have a talking skeleton.
And multiple different things that are absolutely horrifying, let's be honest.
Yes, not just him. There's a lot of like very dark themes within the fantasy world that, you know, we look at vampires and
lovely.
monsters and stuff. Yeah, no, Skullduggery is amazing, but like the whole idea of it being like a bit surreal and abnormal. And you've also got this idea of being somewhat of a thriller. So, and a comedy. Sorry, comedy was the 4th main one. The thriller was like linked with the horror stuff. It is a comedy on top of that. Now, looking at those genres, as someone who reads a lot and as someone who has quite... I have my preferences for reading. I really like fantasy. I like romance and fantasy. I don't really read a lot of horror because I don't like too much gory stuff. I don't really read a lot of sci-fi unless it's the sci-fi fantasy stuff. Not big fan of crime, not gonna lie. Not my thing at all. I can't get through a crime book. They all feel the same to me. And I know, unpopular opinion, at me if you want. That's my opinion. I looked at this book and the genres, and I knew you were like excited about it, and I thought, you know, I'll give it a go. If Owen enjoys it, I'll see how I go with it. Then I saw there were like 4 genres, and I thought, oh god, this is going to be a mess. How on earth do you fit 4 majorly different genres? Like, how does horror and comedy coexist in a book? How does like fantasy and horror coexist? How does crime and fantasy? How does this work? It's done extremely well. So it's not just, when you look at the comedy, when you think of like a comedy intertwined into another like fantasy novel, it's normally just little side gags. It's just silly little offhand jokes every so often, kind of comic relief, cringe sort of stuff. But in this case, the gags and the jokes are so closely intertwined with the like situations that are happening because of the crime. So like, you know, looking into the like murder scenes and going and finding clues, and in that there's little silly gags and side comments that then lead into horror, which shouldn't work, but it does because of the nuances and because of how subtle certain ideas, images and themes are. It allows Landy to just bridge that gap ever so gently to give you this sense of, oh, this bit's quite funny. Oh, and actually that's quite clever because the funny bit's now given us the next clue to this murder mystery case. Oh, actually, this next clue kind of links into horror because guess what? We're going to fight a bunch of monsters in the meantime. Oh, and that also kind of links to fantasy because these monsters are stereotypically fantasy creatures but painted in the light of horror. How does someone do that? Honestly, mad props to
Low
Landy.
work and effort.
Honestly, it is extremely impressive. And
I think it's also like the strength of the characters, because
Yes.
a lot of them, they are so well built.
Mhm.
Like, they can go from being dead serious to joking to like sarcastic or silly, and they can bounce all over the place, and you believe that it's completely natural, and it feels completely natural. You're not sitting there like feeling like a bit of whiplash. And I think it does come from the strength of not even just the 2 main characters, even supporting characters are really well designed.
Yes, I agree. Even like the small side characters that you see for like 1 or 2 scenes, like even like the bands of like monsters. So like if you look at the Cleavers, who are mentioned to do with is it the Elders, not the Ancients? The Ancients are older than that. It's the Elders, and they're the kind of the guards of the Elder
Cleavers
Sanctuary.
are basically like, they are trained. They're people who willingly go into willing servitude to act as bodyguards, and like obviously they have like this really intimidating persona, and
They
the
have
main trait of the
scythes.
Cleavers is they are emotionless and empty,
And
but,
they
like,
have a
even
big
in-
scythe. Can we talk about that?
Oh Honestly, for the longest time, I thought they were basically like plague doctors. I thought they looked like plague doctors in my head with big sides.
Mm-hmm. I kind of got Grim Reaper kind of vibes with that, like, kind of dark, pallid complexion and no, like almost like a skeleton. No emotion is shown on that face because it's almost as if the skin showing that emotion is just so dead, like so taut that there's just nothing there. Even that, like, as I say, the description of, they're just like side characters. They're mentioned a little bit, but they're not really like personality. There's no real personalities given to each individual one. Their entire like character is described and developed so well within itself. Even they play a massive role in it.
Even though Cleaver's like, they are all grouped together into one being because that's just how they are. They're still like a strong, something like the bodyguards. You shouldn't be able to finish reading the book and go, oh, do you remember the Cleavers?
Exactly. Normally like side characters, or like the hollowed ones.
Yeah.
They're a whole just like another like generic monster, but I remember certain mentions. So there's a particular scene where they're fighting the hollowed ones. I think it's when they're storming the caverns, and one of them, it's described how, because their skin is like paper, there's nothing to them, they're just paper thin kind of wraith things. When they kill one of them, their skin kind of crumbles in and falls to the ground as a sheet of paper. That description alone gives so much information about how these things look, what they are like, how they act, how they react to things. That alone, and how simply described yet very well executed something like that is. It works surprisingly well at giving a real clear picture of things and making moments like that memorable in like, let's be honest, most stories wouldn't make a moment like that particularly memorable. It's like, they cut down the monster, end of story. Simple descriptions like that gives you so much insight into the way this world that Landy has created works. It's because normally when you think of it, a novel, it's either got really good world building and story building and is very like story centered, or it's got really good character building and is character centered. This has both a pretty like on par level, and it doesn't sacrifice one for the other, and it doesn't sacrifice consistency either. Both the world building, the character building, and the plot in general are so well constructed and so well intertwined that there is no one or the other. Because normally when you look at a book, you're like, oh, that's very character-centered, it's great for the character development, or that's very plot-centered, that's, definitely more focused on the plot and the characters. This is both. I mean, the plot is overarchingly a little bit generic, but the little nuances in the plot and the little, intricacies within the plot are very much not generic.
I think, it being generic is the reason why it's so good, because, the world is built up so well, the characters are built up so well that, the plot couldn't be too complicated. If it was too complicated, it would be too much. Mm-hmm. So it being generic, actually, it lends itself to being really good that way. If you're going to, point by point within certain aspects, it is basically just like a murder mystery, oh, my family member has been murdered, who did it? But that simplicity helps it because it allows the characters and the world to shine so much instead of being overtaken by these complicated twists and turns that, mind you, are still there. They're just if you were to bullet point them down, they would seem so simple.
Yeah. I think that's very, very important, and I completely agree. I think, although saying that, the plot isn't actually that generic. The overarching theme is, but the actual plot itself, if you look at what's actually going on, the main kind of overall plot of good versus evil, very generic. But the way
the first 2/3 of the plot are generic, and then stuff starts happening, and it's oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah, ignore everything I just said. Apparently, I've just been shown to be a liar. And it's very clever like that because it takes a simple idea. It's almost similar to Terry Pratchett in a way, which I will talk about on another occasion, but you take an everyday idea or theme or generic sort of ideology and you go, cool, here's this. Let me just scrump that up, tear it into a million pieces and discard it for this incredible new version. And it's done really well. So I honestly think that's been one of the biggest selling points of the book, has to be the combination of both very good world building and also still very good plot and storytelling, because the plot seems generic to begin with to give you that world building, that character development, and then suddenly hey, plot! And it's really very, very well done, I have to admit. Going off of that, who is your favourite character? And you can be generic if you like. Yeah. Who do you like?
Okay.
They don't have to be good. They don't have to be a good character, just a character that you love.
My favourite character from this first book, I have to say that because other characters do get introduced later, and to be honest, I liked some more than the ones in this book. My favourite character overall is Ghastly Bespoke. I love him.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Ghastly, for people who obviously don't know, is Skulduggery Pleasant's best friend and his tailor. He's a sorcerer who's not fond of sorcerers. He's this snarky, witty guy who has been cursed from birth to have scars all up and down him. His mother was a boxing champion and she taught him his move. And, like, my favourite line ever from that first book is literally, like, his off comment of being like, oh, well, I look bad enough, I might as well be a tailor, I don't want to make it any worse.
Yeah, I remember that. He's like, I might as well just go into something a little bit more mundane.
It's like, I'm just gonna look worse, and I don't want to see that.
Yeah. Oh, dear.
Like, okay, even in this book, you can tell Ghastly really, really, really gets the short end of the stick in a lot of stuff. Like, if someone has to get beat up for some reason, it's Ghastly.
That's very true, to be fair.
But, like, I think whenever he is there, he's so good, he's so fun, and he's down to earth. He's one of the like, everyone except for Skullduggery takes one look at Stephanie, who is 12 in this book, by the way, and goes, hey man, maybe don't bring a 12-year-old into dangerous, life-threatening situations.
Maybe don't bring her into this world of chaos and death and nasty stuff. And meanwhile, she's here like, no, I want to be the hero. I mean, it all works out in the end. But yeah, I agree. I think he's a very interesting character. He's not one that you'd expect to be particularly important, and all of a sudden he's very important. And I think
he could have been like such just a throwaway.
Just,
line of,
he
like,
was the tailor. He's an old friend.
friend.
Goodbye. Like,
But like, no, he's more than that. Like, he comes, he helps, and he even apologizes to Stephanie, being like, "Look, I'm sorry if I was a bit harsh about it. I do genuinely believe this world is dangerous, and because it is, and I just don't want you to get hurt thinking that it's some wonderful, amazing place."
yeah, definitely.
I love him for that. He's so down to earth and good, but also he's willing to be silly and punch things.
He's a relatively normal individual if you think about it, despite his appearance and his obvious like background and his affiliation to like magic and all things weird and wonderful. He's just like, I'm obviously stern and an adult and know what should be going on, but at the same time, I can have a laugh. It's fine. To be fair, if you're friends with Skullduggery, you've got to be able to have a laugh. Let's be honest. If you can't, you're kind of not going to be friends with him for very long.
It's like one of the few people who can stand Skullduggery for very long. And honestly, I think that's a great testament to his character in and of itself.
Yeah, definitely.
Picking up, who is your favourite character?
I have a couple that I like for very different reasons. They're both female characters, and it's probably because of their portrayal as a female character that I like them both. I like Tanith, because she is a badass. She's absolutely incredible. She's strong and powerful, but you don't see that straight away. You see it a little bit. There's a scene where when she's first introduced, she's fighting this troll. And she's fighting this troll when he's not like a little weakling, because trolls in this universe, during the day, they're like small and weak and just little things that want to make people's lives hell and just sit under their bridge and whatever. Stroke of midnight comes. Hey, guess what? I'm big, I'm mean, I'm going to eat you. It's kind of fun. And she ends up unintentionally fighting him at his full-fledged, like, mean and want to eat your face kind of stage, and winning the fight. But even then, she doesn't seem that powerful. She takes down this troll, but she does it in such a, like, simplistic way that you think, oh, anyone could do that. Like, that's fine.
Yeah, she's just a good swordswoman.
And then she develops so much that later in the book you realise, oh my god, she's powerful. And it's done in a way that's very clever. As we were talking about earlier, she comes out of a battle with like a hole in her back. Just like a straight up like hole, a chunk is missing from her back. And she's like, yeah, it kind of hurts. Like, you can patch me up later. It's fine. It's all good.
Kind of dying, but I'll get over it.
It's fine. And, like, that hardy attitude and how, like, not only are the male characters, and I know this is sounding very feminist, this isn't my intention, the male characters are shown as very strong and very, like, open and very, like, yeah, I can beat the situation. She's shown as equally as powerful in her own right, and it's not because, oh, well, woman power. She's actually shown as being this strong and capable individual, and it is absolutely incredible. And I really do like that. The second character I'm a big fan of absolutely has to be China. And I know that's very controversial.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought you didn't like her.
I don't like her. But it's because I don't like her that I'm actually a big fan of hers from like a reader's point of view. From a story point of view, she's awful. I really don't like her. But as someone who is looking at how her character is written, it's very, very clever, because right from the get-go, you can tell there is an air about her. She is a powerful son of a bee, and she knows that she is, and she knows she can do whatever she wants and get what she wants, and she's not afraid to use and abuse that power. It's very clever, but it's not immediately shown as like, I am a big, powerful queen, everyone rules at my feet, everyone bows before me. It's just this subtle thing of how Stephanie can't take her eyes off her and can't figure out why, and she doesn't want to take her eyes off of her because she's so beautiful and she just wants to stay here by her side and help her. And oh god, I'm under a spell. It's clever. It's subtle.
She got
and
this aura of, I'm better than you. I
essentially,
know it, you know it, let's not talk about it.
I love the subtlety of a good character. I absolutely love it, and I think it's done so well for China. And even when later, when she turns quite nasty, because fun fact, she's not a great person. She's kind of just in it for herself and her collection, because she just wants to keep her little book safe. And honestly, mood, feel that. Same though. Even through that bit, the fact that she's meant to be kind of snaky and evil, but in a sinister way, as opposed to just being like, I'm going to rip your head off, is like, oh, are you sure you want to do that there? Are you sure that's the move you want to make?
That one.
Go for it.
I would argue China isn't evil. She's not good.
Well, no, she's not evil, but like, in the moments where she's shown to be a little bit of a moral dilemma, it's not like I am straight up nasty and I'm just going to take your head off. She's just, I'm very coy and very sly, and I'm just going to weave my little web around you so that you can't escape my absolutely horrendous amount of power.
Obviously, remembering my opinion is obviously coloured by
later books.
Apparently books. So.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, even by the end of this book, you know she's not wholly inherently evil. She's just kind of wanting to do things for herself. She doesn't really care about wars and whose side she's on. She's just like, I just care about me and my books. And honestly, same.
China has always been like the type of person, you can even tell in like this book alone, China is the type of person who has always been out for herself. She will be lovely to you if she knows she can get what she wants out of you, and otherwise you basically don't exist to her.
Yeah, she
is like very powerful, and she has a lot of interconnected webs, and she's, I think, like you said, she's a very strong and good character, but she also has like this aura of like, I bet you money no one knows anything about her. Yeah, with exception to like the obvious.
Yeah, she's definitely very, very interesting, and because she's quite complicated, even from the get-go, like she's not cut dry. You think, oh well, she's kind of sinister, she's a bit mysterious, fine. You get to find out a little bit more about that mystery, and I think it's very, very, very clever. And because of how you see her kind of develop and chop and change and kind of figure out that she's not like a clear-cut character, I kind of like that, and that fluidity that she's given is impressive from a writer's standpoint, to be able to give a character that level of fluidity and of kind of moral dilemma. Like she's not clear-cut. She's not like, I am good, I am evil. She's like, I'm questionable. And I think it's very difficult to write a character that way, especially in a kid's book. Normally it's just a case of, here's the good guys, here's the bad guys, good guys beat the bad guys, good guys win. Whereas trying to be existing here like, hi, I am neither of the above, I'm just a bit nasty and a bit sassy and a bit of a queen. Hi.
I'm gonna hear like, I mean, I might be good, I might be bad, what day of the week is it?
Exactly. Depends how I'm feeling that morning. If I've had a good cup of coffee, like, you're my best friend. If I've had a bad cup of coffee, yeah, not happening. I really like that, and as I say, from a story point of view, and from, like, how she acts in certain situations, I hate her guts. But, as a, like, reader looking into her character development, oh my god, she's incredible. Which, yeah, I did say my opinion on this would be quite controversial. She is really fun, though, and she's a really fun character to, like, look at. Obviously, I will say the obvious, Skullduggery himself is a very, very interesting character and very fun. I'm not going to sit here and pick the generic one, because there are smaller characters that do as good of, if not a better job of what Skullduggery does. But he is almost, in a way, not just a character, he is himself this clever bridge between comedy, crime, horror, thriller, and fantasy. He himself is a centre point. He is all four genres in one character. Let's be honest here. Let's talk about... We don't normally talk about the main character because, you know, boring. But let's talk about the main character for a second.
Well, one of them. Just very quickly, Valkyrie is quite shallow. She's a 12-year-old girl being written by what is most likely a 30-plus-year-old man. And there are moments where it shows.
I'm going to clarify very quickly. Valkyrie and Stephanie are the same character, just in case it wasn't clear enough from the get-go. We're using the names interchangeably. I'm more likely to use Stephanie because she's only just known as Valkyrie by the end of the book. Just be aware.
And I'm more likely to call her Valkyrie because
later on in the
every
series,
book onward calls her Valkyrie. Even in the... Actually, there's a thing you might have noticed. The thought processes in her head. Even after she takes the name Valkyrie, she still calls herself Stephanie.
Yep. And other people
From
still
this
call her
book
Valkyrie.
onward, she doesn't. She is Valkyrie onward, like...
That's clever.
Again. And I actually I'd have to double check it. I initially thought that this book did a swap at one point, like to the point where she started calling herself Valkyrie, but I may have been wrong.
She does a little bit towards the end, but it's still kind of blurred
very,
lines.
very end where she's getting used to being Valkyrie Kane.
People
over
call
Stephanie
her Valkyrie Kane, like, all the way through the point where she chooses the name, but even in her thought process, it's still Stephanie does this, Stephanie does that, whereas by the very end of the book, it finally takes on the form of Valkyrie does this, Valkyrie does that.
The book follows from her perspective some of the time. It is majority in her head, but sometimes it swaps to different people depending on the perspective that we the reader need to get.
Yeah, when I said I just realised when I said main character being Skullduggery, that's actually not the case. It was very misleading. I mean, like, one of the central characters. Yeah, it's written from her perspective. It's in third person, but it's written from her perspective. Skullduggery is one of the main characters she meets. I'm thinking from her perspective. I'm thinking, oh, who's the main character from her perspective? Completely forgetting that I wasn't clarifying. Let's talk about the namesake of the book, because he is a very interesting character. He is very well written himself, even though he is kind of one of the main characters. You'd expect him to be well written, so which is why I didn't want to talk about him, because if he's not well written, then, well, the book's kind of a flop.
That'd be our main talking point if he was badly done.
Oh, let's be honest, if this book was bad, that would be the first thing, is like, oh, this character, right, let me tell you.
I want to say, like, certain things about him that I think are really well done in this first book, based on how he is in later books. But before I do that, I want to hear, like, your opinion on Skullduggery.
Yep.
Because we see the hints of it that he is not as good of a person as he seems to be.
Yeah, I have a feeling there's a really dark backstory coming later in the series. And I'm sure you're already aware of this fact. But
no.
Me? No. Yeah, it's just a side comment.
No, like, I want to, like, hear, like, your thoughts on that, and, like, just
see what it's like for a reader who doesn't know
even about that.
Yeah.
Because...
So, as looking at Skullduggery as, like, someone analysing characters for their character building, he is a fantastically interesting and incredibly well written character, and there is so much good stuff about him as a character, which includes the bad stuff that is written about him as a character. It's because there's this darker side, again, blurred lines between what's morally good and morally bad, and philosophy is great in this context. As an ex-philosophy student, this is a fantastic talking point, because not only is he himself literally the centermost liminal character, liminality being kind of this transgression point, this line, so the crossing of boundaries. That's what a liminal moment is. It's kind of crossing a boundary. So stepping over a doorway is a liminal moment. Crossing a bridge, liminal moment. Dusk to dawn, liminal moment.
Look at the walking liminal moment then.
He is basically liminality personified. He is not only the bridge between all four genres, he is also this bizarre bridge / doorway between, I'm not sure if it's bridge or doorway yet, because we've not heard enough about him in this book, between morally good and morally repugnant. Not just morally bad, but morally repugnant. Like, it's two extremes. It's not even like, oh, he's got a little bit of good, and he's got like a little bit of a slightly dark side, but not too bad. Like, he's indifferent. He's kind of like default in the middle of, like, I'm on the fence, I'm impartial. I've done some really wonderfully great and admirable things and continue to do so. I've also been an absolute hell Satan spawn who has done absolutely horrible and vile and awful things. There's no in between. And I think that's a really well designed character. I think that's been very well thought out, and something that's very difficult to achieve, because you can have someone who kind of blurs the lines, but generally it's someone who's a little bit good and a little bit evil. Never do you really see, especially in a kid's book, you don't normally see someone who is both really good and really bad. Normally you get some kind of in between at best, if you get any of that at all. So looking at him by the end of the book as if I'm a character in the book, and as if someone's just looking at him as a person rather than a character, mixed opinions because of the blurred lines between positive and negative. I don't dislike him by any means. I still think, based on the fact, he's doing good now compared to what he did. Yeah, he might not have the right motives for it, but at the very least he is sticking to doing the right thing at the moment. So his morality is somewhat, not clear cut, but it's somewhat set on the more good side of things. Yes, his past is not so good. He's at the very least currently, albeit his motives might be a bit dark, which is a whole other debate in itself. I still think he is a good person at this point, at least at this point with this knowledge. Yes, I can say he's not entirely perfect. No one is. Let's be honest. He is, or was at least, human. No one's perfect. But as a character point of view, looking at both positives and negatives, he's very well written. And that's not just me gushing about him. He has some really horrible sides. Like, his whole reason for doing this is purely because he despises the man. Because essentially, so is it Serpine?
The main villain of this book is called Nefarian Serpine. Derek Landy approved audiobook said Serpine.
Oh, okay, well in that case, Serpine, yeah, we'll go with that. Or just Nefarious, we'll just go with that. So Serpine, Serpine is a very interesting character. He's seen briefly at the very beginning and then seen obviously more to the late game because, you know, why wouldn't you see the evil dude? Like, oh, there's a big evil guy, but you're never actually going to see him and you're going to win them all miraculously without ever coming into contact with him.
Yeah, he's around somewhere.
Essentially, the part that we know about Skullduggery's backstory is he was in a heated battle with Serpine purely because, you know, big magic war and all that. Long story short, there was a big magic war against good and evil, light and dark. Someone wanted world domination. Someone was like, hey, that's not cool, man. Don't do that. And as such...
Not vibing with that.
Yeah, not really feeling that one, man. And as such, big war commences. And there is a heated battle between Serpine and Skullduggery in which Serpine actually kills Skullduggery. Now, Skullduggery at this point in his death absolutely hates, and I mean despises, to the point where he would happily torture, strip limb from limb, and do the worst things imaginable to Serpine level of hatred.
Side note, this is because Serpine did that to his family.
Yeah, so Serpine, before this war, not only did he kill... well, not even before this.
During the war. That was how he killed Skulduggery.
So he killed Skulduggery because he killed his wife and kids in front of him, and then laced a dagger with poison because he knew Skulduggery would be so angry that he'd pick up the poison without even the dagger without even thinking, oh, this is, you know, this is a trap, to kill him because magic isn't enough. He wants to feel this man suffering beneath his fingertips, and in doing so, the poison kills him. And he dies with this burning hatred in him. He then, by magic, which we don't know how yet, I don't know if you find this out later, but he is basically brought back as a skeleton. He's brought back his bones, well, he's burned, his body is burned, and his bones survive, and the magic kind of sews them together, and he becomes a sentient, walking, talking, we don't know how he's talking, he doesn't have lips, skeleton. Magic is a fun thing. The
answer is magic, it's always magic.
Yeah, let's be honest, we'll just call it magic. I mean, it is, but, you know, we'll just call it magic. He comes back, and he is still filled with this burning hatred, and his biggest goal is, I want to take down Serpine. This man doesn't deserve to be alive right now. I'm going to torture him. I'm going to kill him. He's going to suffer for what he's done. As a result, he goes into detective work, and he has this kind of arc where he's, you know, seemingly doing good. Like, when you first meet him, he's just doing his detective work. You're like, wow, this man is a really good man. Like, look at him go, like, doing stuff for the law, like, doing stuff for justice. Yeah, no, the reason he's doing that is just because he wants to see this man tortured to death. Which is where the morality of blurred lines and stuff kind of comes into play. Because, like, yeah, he's doing good things, but he's not doing them for the right reasons. Yikes. Might want to rethink that one, Skullduggery. Not gonna lie, I don't know if that's gonna hold up in court of, like, hey, I captured the bad guy, but I did it because I wanted him to suffer.
Is that how you read that?
Yeah, for me, that's how I read that. Why?
Sorry, no, keep going. It's interesting.
Okay, fair enough. That's my takeaway from this book. If you read it differently, then fair play to you. But that's the fun of books. They're open to interpretation. That's my interpretation. This whole podcast series is to be about interpretations. If you come away from this podcast and go, I don't think that's right at all, I completely disagree. Fine, disagree. It leaves great debates open, so please do. My opinion is not necessarily the right one. It's just an opinion. But that's my biggest takeaway from him. I think he is a very clever character for blurring lines, and his kind of morality shifting is done really well and also really cool. Like, it's as a writer myself, it's really cool. I couldn't do that. It's really cool. Or if I did do something like that, it would take me many years of trying and failing, crying about it, sleepless nights and panicking, and then eventually coming up with some subpar equivalent. This man has talent. And this is the first book I've ever read by him, and I'm very impressed considering it's supposedly a kid's book. And not something, again, I don't like crime. I don't like horror. I don't like thriller. I mean, I don't even like that much in terms of comedy unless it's woven into fantasy. This book has it all, and it's very well done. So,
that it?
Yeah, that's my rant over.
No, I just wanted to, like, make sure in case there was, like, something else you wanted to say. You're maybe, like, taking a breath,
yeah, after that.
You just kind of kept going.
Well, I mean, I love this book. It's the first time I've picked up a book and immediately loved it. Normally it takes me a while to kind of go, yeah, it's great, and I'll fall in love with the book, but I've not enjoyed a book this hard that I'm like, it's one of these books that I reckon I'll reread, because this book has so much, like, hidden comedy and hidden stuff that you don't pick up the first time because you're trying to get all the plot details in. It's a book that I will probably reread 3 or 4 times just to get a grasp of what the heck is going on.
I gotta say, like, if you end up reading the whole series, which you say that you're planning to do, so we're going to assume that you are, the first book specifically in this series, once you've read even just a couple books in, it hits different. I can say from obviously my experience of rereading it, and like, obviously there's certain things about Skullduggery that you don't know, there's certain things about Valkyrie that you don't know, there's certain things about every character that come to light later. There's these little hints in the first book that come back like 5 books later that you're like, oh damn, I forgot about that.
Yeah, you kind of forget that things exist, or like pick up on the smaller things that you may have missed that make sense later on as opposed to making sense now, and you're like, oh, I get it. And that's something I think is really important in a good like world building kind of situation. You need to have these little bits that if you revisit it, you go, oh, I see.
I feel especially like, okay, I'm not saying that Valkyrie and Skulduggery's banter gets worse as the books go on. If anything, it gets better because like they trust each other more and they get like this. I am not even lying. It feels like like father-daughter banter. It's great.
Love that. Like,
this man has adopted her and he didn't even realize. But in this first book, obviously he hasn't yet. He's just kind of cautiously being like, yeah, you sure this is what you want?
Yeah.
And like, I feel like a lot of their interactions, like, even after you've already read it, if you go on to read the rest of the series, coming back, it still feels fresh and new, and it's like, oh god, I forgot he reacted like that. I forgot he said this. I was saying this to you earlier. I forgot at one point Skulduggery takes advantage of the fact that Valkyrie doesn't know anything about the magical world to basically just make up whatever. And he'll do it with a straight voice. I can't say face because he doesn't really have a face.
No.
And she's like, wow, really? And then just immediately, no, what are you even talking about? That'd be stupid anyway.
Yeah, I think that there's a particular scene where Skullduggery is being tortured by, is it by Serpine? Yeah, it's by Serpine himself because he's using his hand.
Serpine.
Yeah.
He's the only one who tortures in this one.
Yeah, let's be honest. And he's got him in this chair, he's got him completely bound by both magic and physical means, and he's like, oh, I'm ready to torture you. This is the part where in the past you'd say, do your worst, and I'd go and do my worst. And Skullduggery's like, nah, actually this time, mate, I was going to ask you to go easy. I'm feeling a bit tender today. And he's like, yes, of course. Are you going to tell me where this key is? And any last words? And he's like, yeah, sure. What? Really? Nah, go do your worst, mate. I'm only joking. And it's like, it's obvious. When you look back, you're like, oh, it's so obvious he's being sarcastic. For a second, you're like, what? Like, generally when it comes to sarcasm, it's pretty clear from the get-go, like, oh yeah, he's going to come back and say something witty. But in that situation, I was like,
is he?
Huh? And then I was like, there it is.
One of, like, my favourite examples of, like, that sort of thing. And also, like, the way the tone can jump back and forth, especially, like, surrounding Skullduggery. Skullduggery is, like, the king can go from dead serious to joking in literally a millisecond. The man is just, backwards and forwards. But it's so a part of his character that you don't mind it. It feels natural. It would have felt wrong if you didn't.
Yeah, it's not like cringy, kind of punny, kind of awkward humour that's like just, I mean, it is kind of off the nose. It is very like, silly humour because it's aimed at kids, and the kid's not going to find adult humour very funny because they're not going to understand half of it. But it's not to a point where you're like, oh, there's another joke cracked, and oh, yeah, no, I saw that one coming. It's done in a way that it's funny for all audiences, and even looking back, you're like, okay, yeah, that was pretty smart. Like, yeah, that's pretty good. I get you on that one.
Yeah, like, my favourite moment is, okay, Ghastly Bespoke, my favourite character, at one point in this book, he has to turn himself to stone to survive an enemy's attack. So, he did all he could, and he turned himself to stone to survive. And afterwards, they all are, everyone who did survive it, Skulduggery, Valkyrie, and Tanith, they reconvene at, like, a gas station, and Tanith is freaking out because you can tell she's never been in this type of situation before. She's used to it being a kind of, I don't want to say small beans, but like in comparison to that situation, be like smaller risks. And Skullduggery goes off at her. It is the first time in the book you ever see him like genuinely angry and upset. Like up until this point, even when he's like annoyed or something, he can still kind of come back and be witty or play it off and be cool about it. Yeah. This is the first time you see him actually upset, and it's because he's just lost Ghastly for God knows how long. And as soon as he gets in the car and they wait for Tanith, and as he's about to leave, she jumps in, and she's just like, well, there's no need to be so, like, over the top about it. Like, it's just this offhanded wee comment. I feel like in most other situations, that would feel off, but in that situation, no, it felt right for her to just walk in and be like, well, damn, there's no need to be so dramatic, anyway.
Yeah! Even, like, so there's some really, like, obviously cliche and kind of cringy and overly dramatic bits, but the characters are self-aware that it's a bit over the top and a bit cringe, because, like, there's, when they go over the wall, like, so there's a scene where they're all going over this wall. Is it? No, it's not Bliss. It is Ghastly, isn't
right?
it? Yeah, it's Ghastly Bespoke. They're going over the wall, and he, like, they get there, and it's Tanith, what are they called? Oh, goodness.
The Cleavers?
Cleavers, it is the Cleavers. I was going to call them the Creepers, and I was like, that's not quite right.
The
not quite right. Them, and also, obviously,
That would have been
Valkyrie.
good for getting over that wall, though. You just send them in.
Just blow the whole thing to smithereens. And they're going over the wall, and then Ghastly's just like, I shall ascend like a god over the wall, and then just plop delicately onto the floor. And then Tanith looks over at Valkyrie, is like, do you want a leg up? Yeah, that'd be fine. Just it's like,
Oh,
yeah, that was a bit over the top. I could probably do the same thing, but like, that's a bit much. We'll just give you a boost.
I absolutely love that before he did that, the Cleavers like did a fancy jump over, and he even is like muttering show-offs.
And then he shows off! It's so good. It's very funny.
It's so good. It's so funny, and it's such an enjoyable little moment, which then is followed by like an incredibly serious moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it just feels like this is how these people would react. This is like they're so well built that even though like you just read the book, so you don't know them as well as I do, but you can clearly tell like, yeah, that's how these people would react. This feels right. This is how these people are. It would be completely natural for them to go from like having to send people to their deaths to making stupid jokes or like rolling their eyes at having to do a menial task. It doesn't feel off. It doesn't feel out of character or like a forced kind of interaction.
No, it doesn't feel like he's just throwing comedy in to get that extra genre in there, or just throwing these little bits of, bizarreness in just to, make that bit a little bit this or make that a little bit more kid-friendly. It's done exceptionally well because, yes, it does make it accessible for the target audience by pushing in these little bits of comedy or these snarky comments or like this like chopping and changing. But it's done so smoothly that it doesn't feel like, oh, it's just been thrown in because it's a kid's book. It feels like it's meant to be there, which of course it is. That's what the writer intended. He wouldn't have written it in if it wasn't meant to be there. But
no, the jokes just kind of place themselves afterwards.
It just needs that just appeared on the page. It's very interesting to see that and how that chopping and changing works. I said it's very smooth and it works very, very well, and I think it's interesting to see that, especially, as I said, especially as an adult who's not part of the target audience range at all. It's interesting to go, okay, that's quite interesting, because a second ago we were literally talking about some really gory killing of a monster, and now all of a sudden we're cracking jokes. Okay, it works really well. Definitely, like, you can see the characters doing it, and it shouldn't work, though. As an adult, I look at it, and as a writer, I go, that shouldn't be good. That should be really bad. Bizarre idea, executed well, and I think that's what makes it so unique and so memorable.
It's that fun case of, if you were to bullet point exactly what was happening and like place it down in the most robotic way possible, it shouldn't work. There should be something clunky in here. But Derek Landy, he's managed to so smoothly make everything work into itself. It is a case of it just works. I
agree. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I'm a big fan of it.
Question.
Go for it. Ask away.
Not so much did you see the ending coming, but like, did you at any point like manage to guess it before the story told you?
I had a off feeling about Bliss. I wasn't expecting exactly what happened with him to happen. Essentially, he betrays, well, to begin with, he betrays Skullduggery in favour of Serpine, and then he betrays Serpine in favour of Skullduggery.
Well, in favour of the Sanctuary, not Skullduggery.
Well, yeah, but, he's just in it, But, a couple of like joint betrayals. Before he betrayed Skullduggery, it was very not obvious, but there were hints that like something's not quite right about this man. There's something about him that's gonna push this plot in a weird direction.
I actually should say, for plot reasons, a lot of the characters that we get introduced to, not all of them were fighting on the good side of the war. Like, it wasn't just Nefarian Serpine who was on the bad side. There were other characters that we were introduced to in that time that were fighting on the bad side of the war. But I think it makes like it really interesting because a lot of the grayer characters tend to be in that state, but actually a few of the good ones also, and it's so interesting to like see that with that knowledge. Okay, so you saw the Mr. Bliss thing semi coming, like you knew something was up with him.
Oh yeah, I knew straight away that something was very much up with him. I didn't like him.
Did you see him and China being siblings?
No, that I didn't see. I have to admit that was a new one to me. So I think the whole plot with Bliss is very unique because he doesn't just double cross one person. He kind of reverts and it's a bit all over the place. And again, because he's so all over the place, it shouldn't work well because it's like, oh, he's one and he's the other and oh, what next? It works really well because it's subtle enough. It is interesting enough. It is bizarre enough in itself that it works in this topsy-turvy world that has been created. I definitely knew something was off. I knew that there was an air about him that was off. And when they went to him about the key, I knew straight away. I was like, you shouldn't be going to him with this key. Something doesn't feel right about this. And then guess what? It was a bad idea and crap hit the fan.
Surprise!
Who'd have thought? Unfortunately, it all went a bit wrong. I kind of saw that a little bit, especially as soon as he started edging towards Skullduggery. I was like, someone's not getting out of here in a good shape. Something's not gonna go very well. That was I wasn't expecting to be sisters with China, though. When that was revealed, I was a bit like, sisters, siblings with. I thought the word siblings and said the word sisters. Yeah.
Mr. Bliss, why didn't you tell us?
So yeah, that bit of the plot was a bit of a shock to me. And I was a bit like, oh, okay, that's news. I mean, to be fair, I should have in a way seen it coming because they're both a bit snaky and a bit mysterious and a bit blurred lines.
Looking back on it, they actually talk a lot alike.
Mm-hmm.
Like their speech patterns and their way of interacting with the world is very similar. You can tell that they come from the same upbringing. But like first time reading it, it's not that obvious. Second time reading, you're kind of looking for it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Because I know they're siblings. I'm like looking to see if there's any hints to it. And like first time around, you're obviously not looking for that. You don't think that this big, terrifying man is friends with the smoothest, sneakiest woman you've ever met.
Yeah.
And I like it. I like that like it just randomly is like, oh damn.
You're like,
siblings.
Oh wait, and then suddenly when you look back and you look at the way they're talking, the speech patterns and the way they're described, you're like, oh, I kind of see it now.
It was there.
That one I wasn't expecting. I also wasn't expecting Bliss to turn back to help the Sanctuary and the Elders. I wasn't expecting that one at all, if I'm being completely honest. Which, it should have been obvious now that I look at it. I'm like, oh yeah, I should have seen that one coming. But it wasn't like a last minute, like, so everything's going a bit, everything's going X, Y, and then suddenly this happens. It was kind of, you can kind of see stuff leading up to it. Now you look at it with that perspective of, oh, I know what's going to happen. But reading through it the first time, I was like, what's going on? What's going on with this? This is really, oh, I get it. That one was a really interesting twist for me, if I'm being completely honest.
Like, the first time I read it, I don't think I saw Bliss's double cross. We're going to call it a double cross.
Yeah.
I didn't see the double cross coming.
No, I didn't. And it was done very well.
In retrospect, it makes sense, because, like, the first time we meet Serpine, it's Bliss talking to him. Mm-hmm. And, like, looking back on it, you can kind of tell Bliss kind of has this hesitation towards him.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like if he was, like, a more loyal, devoted servant, he wouldn't even bother with those airs and graces.
No.
Even a man like him who, like, from the get-go, you can tell he's, like, a very formal type of person. Mm-hmm. But if he was just there to serve Serpine, he wouldn't have had the type of airs and graces and that hesitation, like, are we gonna fight? It's mentioned that Serpine knows that both of them are thinking, are we gonna fight today?
Essentially.
There wouldn't have been that aura if it wasn't also a case of, like, am I going to have to betray you today, or am I good to keep being a spy?
Speaking of, is there going to be a fight? One scene that is very memorable to me is when Skullduggery is being broken out of prison, essentially being broken out of the dungeons, and he's like, I want to fight! Completely random side note, but yeah, it was very, very funny just to be like, oh, what? Like, he went from being like, oh yeah, I've been trapped in here a while, I've been tortured a lot, can I kill something now? Like, what? That was very, very funny, and I enjoyed that bit. Should we look at some negatives though? Being a little bit controversial here. What's not good about the book? Because we've gushed about it a lot, which isn't a bad thing. It is a fantastic book, but let's look at some things that could have been done better. You're obviously a veteran of this series. What do you think in this book specifically, or you can bring in a little bit from later in the series? What is not good? Or you could, for example, if this book doesn't do a good job of leading up to a later event, why?
I'm gonna be honest. I don't like how Stephanie is characterized. I don't enjoy her a lot in these early books. It's not so obvious here. It has its moments, which is why I'm talking about it, but it's incredibly bad when she gets into, like, her teens.
Oh,
you can tell she's being written by a middle-aged man.
Yeah. Like, he doesn't do a horrific job of characterizing her,
she
but
has beautiful moments. She has great moments, but
I see what you mean.
there are these moments where it's like, I don't know if this is particularly good.
I agree. I mean, even as a 12-year-old girl myself, if I'd read this then, I don't think I'd have been able to, like, associate very well with or kind of get into the character with or understand Stephanie very well. She seems like she's not a bland character necessarily. She's a little bit like...
She's quite bland.
I mean, she is a little bit. She's not like, completely just like, Stephanie went to the shop and bought a book and lived a normal life. It's still like, she's got some character development, but I agree. I think out of all the characters, Stephanie's characterization is a little bit hit and miss, at least from this book. And there are some moments I'm like, oh, okay, cool, she has a personality. And there are some moments where I'm like, she's essentially just a piece of cardboard floating in the wind.
Yeah.
Which
I think I like her. I like a lot of her interactions with like Skullduggery. I
Yes.
think they're well done, but
her inner monologues and inner thoughts were just a bit meh.
right, that's it. That's what I was thinking. Her inner monologues and inner thoughts, they're just, some of them just feel so empty or dull or just kind of like, yeah, duh, why are you taking time to like think about this? And like some of the stuff she does that you're like, Steph,
You're like, really? I know you're 12, but like, really? Yeah.
And there's a time, a moment I mentioned earlier when like Ghastly is like, he doesn't really yell at her. He's just is outlining the fact that like,
You're
hey,
a child.
you're a child, and regardless of how serious you think you're taking this,
Yeah.
undeniably, this world is magical and amazing to you. Like, there is no ifs, ands, or buts about this.
You've got the honeymoon glasses on. You think this is beautiful, magical, wonderful, and you're going to go to Wonderland, and everything's going to be fun and happy, and you're going to meet fairies and do magic. No, it's just death, destruction, and chaos, honey. You're not ready for this.
Yeah, and she gets so unnaturally, like, so mad at him for just pointing that out. And I get it, like, she makes it all about her, about the fact that, like, she's following up her uncle's murder. But, sweetie, even you admit it later, that is what you think this is. Especially when, like, at one point she gets, like, her leg broken, and, like, anytime she's in pain, a part of her is just screaming, why am I doing this? This is stupid. It just highlights the fact, she knows that when she walked into this, she saw a talking skeleton who could throw fire and went, oh damn, that's cool.
Yeah, let's be honest. She just looked at him and went, oh, this is really cool. I like this. And then didn't realise that, oh god, this is horrific. I agree. I mean, obviously she's supposed to be naive because she's a 12-year-old, but I think certain thought processes, even as a 12-year-old, I would have looked at that and been like, why is she reacting like this? Like, he's not wrong. She could die. Like, why is she so butthurt?
Even also the fact that, like, it's highlighted constantly by, like, Skullduggery and a few others that Stephanie supposedly acts older than she appears.
She doesn't.
She
She acts younger than she appears, if I'm being completely
it's
honest.
her exact age up until the dying of the light where she matures up.
Yeah. I think that's the
like
only thing. I know she's obviously supposed to be young. I know it's obviously difficult to write from a young girl's perspective when you're, as you say, a middle-aged man. But I think that is one of the biggest qualms I have. Like, if you look at her in her monologues and her thought processes behind certain things and the way she reacts to certain things and feels about certain things, and also the way she kind of holds herself and speaks, and how, like, at the end there's this thing where she's like, I'm going to stand up and be a strong woman and, you know, do this thing right, I'm going to be a warrior. And actually, when you look at it, you're like, honey, you're just sitting there banging your fist against the table like a 2-year-old going, I want to win. Yeah, I think bits of that could have been done better. Her, like, when she's like, yes, I'm going to do this, I've got power now, I'm motivated, I'm ready, this is like my big, like, arc. It just kind of felt either too cliche or just because she's not got that much character to it, it was a bit of a shock. Because she goes from being like, I'm indifferent to everything, I just find stuff cool, I have no personality, to like, I am this motivated and big and strong character that's going to bring, like, order to the world. It didn't work very well. Don't get me wrong, the overall story is affected.
I'm not like other girls.
Essentially,
like,
yeah.
At the very beginning of the book, that is what her inner monologue
I want
basically
black
says.
because I have no personality to say any other colour in the planet. I want, you know, I don't like go shopping like other girls. I don't like, you know.
Well, damn, I don't know, black.
Yeah, like, come on, you have a favourite colour when you're a 12. Let's be honest, that's all you want to talk about when you're a 12. You're like, hey, what's your favourite colour? Like, that was the go-to talking point when you were 12. Like, if you didn't have
for the
anything else.
goth phase.
Just a little bit. Aside from that, though, I think Stephanie as a whole has some, like, interesting points. I just wish that there was more interesting stuff about her, considering it's her perspective.
She definitely gets a lot more interesting in later books. Like, there's the teenage female written by an adult man moments happen a lot more in her boy phase.
Right.
Trying to think of, like, the way to say that doesn't spoil anything, but I also can't, like, point to a book because I don't remember exactly when it happens.
At some point later in the series when that happens, yep.
Yeah. When she's going through her, like, her teenage boy phase is the moments when they get the worst. I also, like, Stephanie... Okay, I'm going to start calling her Valkyrie because from this...
Yeah, fair enough. We'll slip more to Valkyrie.
I'm trying, but, like, it is the fact that, like, in this book she is Stephanie Edgley, she's not Valkyrie Kenya.
Also her name, Stephanie Edgley.
I like the name Edgley.
I don't mind it, but...
Like, fun and weird, and it's one of those names that you remember.
When you factor in, like, I want to wear black and I want to be with the cool skeleton because skeletons are cooler than, like, girly things, and, like, you know, I want the black Bentley because that's cooler than the canary car. Like, yeah, the canary car is supposed to be loud and obnoxious, but, like, at that age you're probably more likely to go for the canary car because it looks cooler than the sleek black car.
No.
I mean, no,
You've
but like...
seen the Bentley R5 Continental.
No, okay, to be fair, no, I actually disagree with myself
Car
there.
is like a distinctly cool car
Yeah.
in comparison to like a modern car that is an obnoxious colour with obnoxiously coloured seats.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But, like, when you factor in, like, her personality and how she is kind of an edgelord herself, if you don't mind me saying, the name just seems a little bit cliche. I don't have a problem with the name, but it does just, when you look at her personality in the first book, you're kind of like, yeah.
It doesn't
really
feel like
took
it's
a
on
lot
purpose,
coming up with that one.
Which is, like, that's my issue with it, because Stephanie is a very, she has a big ego.
Yeah. Edgelords need edge in their name, so you know who they are, you have to know who the goth kid is by calling them Edge, like...
How else are you supposed to know who they are?
You'd never be able to tell, based on the fact that she's wearing purely black and, wants to hang out with a cool skeleton man. You'd never know, would you? Until you realise her name is Edgeley.
One of Stephanie's biggest flaws is, like, she does get a very big inflated ego.
Oh, yeah.
From her time being a sorcerer, and, like, you can't see it so much in this book. There's little hints to it. Like, she puts on a facade of being that person.
I can imagine as well, now that she's found out that she's a descendant or possible descendant of one of the ancients, that she's probably going to let that go to her head a bit. Because she's 12. She doesn't know any better. Like, she's a young teenager. She doesn't know any better. She just thinks she's cool and, like, better than people because, like, she can do magic and stuff, so...
Yeah, like, but, like, the ego thing is on purpose. Like, it gets built up so it can get popped. Like, I just think, like, the other elements that we were talking about to her personality, they don't feel like they're on purpose. They're not there to be something that's built on or developed. It feels like something that wasn't entirely intentional, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think that's, but to be honest, I think that's the only real negative I have about the book. I can't think of anything else that's majorly bad. I mean, there are probably things that people won't like if you don't like this sort of thing, but I don't think, looking at it as, like, as it's written, taking it for what it is, I don't think there's anything bad about it other than Stephanie's, like, character development, which means we'll probably move on to talk about something else. Is there anything left to talk about that is majorly playing on our minds?
Remember, I wanted to ask you where you think the story is going.
That's a good question, because I have mentioned, and you've also mentioned, Owen has read the entire series. As I said, she's a self-proclaimed fangirl.
Well, I haven't read the latest 2 books, but I'm getting there.
She's getting there. So
I have them.
Owen is pretty well acquainted with the series. She's a big fan, and honestly, I'm already a big fan from book 1. I'm hoping the rest of the books live up to this, enjoyment that I'm currently having.
They get better.
I'm hoping so. I feel like you'll find that with most series, especially if you look at Harry Potter. When it started off, it was obviously meant for the age range it was meant, and you were supposed to grow up with the books. If you read the first book again as like an adult, you're like, yikes. But that's another story in itself. So based on what we've read so far, based on this first book that I've got experience of, I definitely think obviously that there's going to be a lot with the scepter. I can't remember, was it Skullduggery or Valkyrie that ended up with the scepter?
Skullduggery is the one who uses it, so it will be his.
It will be his. Okay, so I can see that coming into play, and I can still see the because it's not malevolent. It's meant to look like malevolent.
Malevolent.
It's malevolent. Okay, yeah. See the trick.
Yeah, there's a few names like that where they're not the word, but they look close enough to it.
That's why I'm like, so malevolent is quite interesting. I feel like he's been mentioned, but he's not really been seen yet, and I feel like obviously he's
currently dead.
Well, yeah, but I mean, look at Skullduggery. Just saying. Even beyond that, I think his, like, influence is what I was getting at more than himself. I think his influence and his followers are something that's still going to be a force to be, like, contended with, and I think that's going to still come into play, and there's still going to be, I think there's going to be some attempts at the scepter, but I also think there's going to be other means at looking at the faceless ones. I mentioned a lot. I don't know if they'll come back. Maybe they'll come back and there'll be a big war with them. Maybe there'll be further attempts to bring them back. Maybe there'll be some internal corruption within the sanctuary. Possibly not. It doesn't seem like that would be something mentioned in a kid's series, but who knows? Internal political corruption might be something for the youth. That might be quite interesting to see. I mean, we've already seen Bliss, so who's to say that won't be the case again? I'm interested.
Him and one of the elders, if you remember.
Oh, yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, no, you're right. I'm not really sure where else this is gonna go other than that. I feel like the faceless ones are gonna play a big role at some point. Because you can just leave this book as that and kind of say, right, well, that's the end of this. I won't read the rest of it because, like, this is a pretty good standalone book. It is a pretty good standalone book. It does leave a few questions, a lot of questions unanswered, but you can look at it as conclusive. So it's just kind of thinking of, where else could it go? Because looking at it, there are 13 books. If it was a trilogy, I'd be like, well, it's probably to do with the scepter, that they're going to grab the scepter back, they're going to bring the faceless ones back, and there's going to be something to do with that happen, and then there's going to be a big war, end of discussion. Because there are 13 long books.
Well, okay, all 13 don't actually have to do with the stuff introduced in this book, though.
Ah, okay. So
Because,
maybe
like I
because
told
he's a
you, the
detective.
Skullduggery
Maybe there'll be
Pleasant
other
books
cases.
they're split into like two main big stories currently. The first one, which takes place between Skullduggery Pleasant and Skulduggery Pleasant, The Dying of the Light, and the current one that we're working through, which takes place from the book after The Dying of the Light to
Oh gosh.
Dead or Alive.
Oh, okay.
So it's a case of, yes, there are 13 books,
Okay.
but not all of them have to do with this.
Oh, I see.
I mean, okay, don't get me wrong, the books after The Dying of Light, the build on what's happened, but basically, like, any questions that you have from this book should be answered by that time.
Yeah.
Like, there shouldn't be anything left beyond the stuff that's just never going to get answered. Like, certain things, like, about, like, we're never going to know the full things about China because she's never going to tell us.
No.
We're never going to know everything about Skullduggery because he's never going to tell us.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely think there's going to be some interesting character development, and there'll probably be some new plot lines brought in then if it's not all relevant to what's going on in the first book. Because he's a detective, there could be other cases happening within like the realm of magic and whatnot. That would be quite interesting to see, and just to see not a mundane kind of, not obviously it's not going to be mundane. It's a world of magic, but
I mean, the mundane for them is still pretty exciting.
Well, I was going to say their version of like a mundane, like we're going through this case as magic, like this is how we solve it, and maybe a little twist in there somewhere might be quite interesting to see. Whether or not that will be the case, I have no idea, but I am definitely looking forward to reading it and reading the rest of the series and going through it. It's definitely one that's got me hooked, and I wasn't expecting you to. I thought, I'll read this one book, it will be perfect. Owen's raving about it, I'll give it a go, and if I don't really like it, well, it's one book, and because it's a kid's book, it's not that expensive. Fine, it will be that. I wasn't expecting to fall as much in love with it as I have, because it's, again, nothing like my... Well, it's nothing like the usual genre that I like. Like, as I said, I'm pretty clear, looking at my previous readings of, like, Eragon and Lord of the Rings, Shattered, or, well, starts with Slated, Trial by Fire, A Song of Achilles. They're very, like, fantasy with a little bit of romance thrown in, kind of very clear-cut. Crime, as I say, I do not read crime for a good reason. I don't like crime for my own personal... I say for a good reason. For my own personal good reason to myself, I don't enjoy crime. But this is a crime book. I mean, it's not fully a crime book, but this has a lot of elements of crime that I wouldn't normally like to read, but it's done really well. And it's got the stuff I enjoy mixed in with stuff that I don't normally enjoy to a point where it's actually, overall, really enjoyable. So, big props to Derek Landy on that one.
I will say, I'm the same as you. Normally when it comes to crime books, I can enjoy the odd one, but honestly, like, that... they are basically all the same deep down inside.
Yeah, I agree. There's only so many ways you can retell someone being murdered, but to the point where it's slightly different, then you've run out of stuff, and essentially they're all the same. Like, let's be honest, someone dies, they go through a series of clues, they find out who did it. Or someone commits, not just die, someone commits a crime, they go through clues, find out who did it. Rinse and repeat for like 300 titles.
This book's more like, someone dies, we figure out who it is, we find out that the music box from 5 chapters ago was actually murderous and it's trying to take over the world now. That's what it feels like sometimes in this book. Something that was offhanded or was just mentioned to help build the world up a bit more is brought back, and it turns out it's as interwoven into this plot as the murder.
Yeah. And it's really, but not just that, like, even, like, aspects of crime in terms of, like, mystery solving, because mystery solving is a big element of crime, and normally it's very poorly done. It's like, they've got a little puzzling thing, and it's like, oh, well, I figured that one out, because I'm, you know, the brainiest person on earth, and I know exactly what that means, because it's generally pretty obvious anyway what it is. In this case, there are certain little puzzles, like the one with the insignia, where he's looking for the, they find the stone that basically the magic stone that tells them what's his name? I can't think of his name.
With the guy in it.
That one. I was trying to think of a way of saying the one with the guy in it without
just saying people. We haven't super in detail gone over the plot of this book because there's like 50 different little things that show up and are just kind of there.
It is definitely better if you've read the book.
Mean,
We've given you a whistle-stop tour, but it's definitely better if you've read the book. Yeah, there's like scenes like that where there's like little nuanced puzzles and little like intricate things that you don't, even you as the reader don't see at first. And you're like, oh, actually that's quite cool. I think that's done really well considering I am not a fan of crime. That just about covers the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the good, the bad, the ugly of Skullduggery Pleasant.
How would you rate it?
Ooh. Out of 5, I'd definitely put it out to a 4 minimum. I think with what's going on with Stephanie, there needs to be some improvement. On that note, Thank you all for joining us for this wonderful instalment of Cover to Coven, in which we have discussed the dead famous bestseller, Love Me a Good Pun.
If you would like to see more Cover to Coven content, feel free to follow us on our Twitter at Cover to Coven.
Thank you all so much, and we will see you all in the next episode.